So, hi everyone. Welcome to the International Association for the Study of the Commons, or IASC's 5th Annual World Commons Week, and thank you for attending. My name is Hita Unnakrishnan. I am a research associate at the Urban Institute at the University of Sheffield in the United Kingdom. I'm also one of the officers of the Early Career Network of the IASC and the co-organizer of this World Commons Week 2023 event. World Commons Week is a global annual event where we celebrate and promote commons research and practice. And this webinar that you're all part of is a keynote webinar for IASC's Oceania region. I'd like to welcome and thank my IASC colleagues, Sophie Jerem, who together with our IASC Oceania Regional Coordinator, Andreas Neef, have been instrumental in co-organizing this webinar with us. Sophie will moderate this keynote webinar on behalf of IASC Oceania. Let me explain how this webinar will work. We've asked our invited keynote speaker to talk for approximately 35 to 40 minutes. I will act as a timer and will signal when there's 5 minutes left. The last 10 minutes of the session will be left for questions and answers. To ensure the webinar functions well, we've limited video to the speaker and moderator, and audio for attendees is muted. Audience members have the ability to ask a question anytime as the talk proceeds. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to type in your questions. After the talk is completed, we will read your questions and our speaker can respond to them. If it appears we need to have a dialogue between you and the speaker, I will unmute you. And for any attendees who have called in via phone, do let us know that you have a question by dialing star and 9 to toggle raise or lower hand the function. We will see your hand raised and will unmute your phone so you can ask your question. Over to you, Sophie, now to introduce our speaker for the day.
Kia ora koutou, ka nui te mihi kia koutou I runga I te kaupapa o te rā. No mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. My name is Sophie Jerem. It's a great honour to be sitting in Wellington in New Zealand and connecting to the Northern Pacific with Mehana Vaughan, Mehana Associate Professor at the University of Hawaii. And I encountered Mehana, first of all, in Lima in 2019, where we were both speaking about commons back in our home territories in New Zealand and in Hawaii for Mehana. And Mehana has then always seems to travel with many adoring students. And we have found many connections between the Indigenous stories of New Zealand and those of Hawaii. So I'm going to allow you to, I guess, tell your origin stories, but it's a great pleasure to have you here able to join us after this period of hearing a lot about Hawaii, but not actually hearing from you directly. So it's lovely to see you, Mehana. Kia ora koutou. Please go ahead with your amazing work.
Aloha mai kaku. E aloha keia. No kilo e hala e ao ka aina. O ni hoku. O kila kila. O na mahana la hana na lima I pono ke ko. Ko a elele. Ika hila kai ko lau. O ka hili, hili na ohana. I ki lau e hala e aloha e. Aloha e. E aloha e. Aloha e. Aloha mai kako to all of you. Mahalo to my son, Kiko Manava, for joining me and greeting you and your ancestors from our ancestors and our place. I think I did have a brief poem to read to you this morning, and then I'll share screen. And I know that it may not be morning in your part of the world, but it's all over the world. Let's see, this is called Come With Me by Naomi Shihab Nye. Come with me to the quiet minute between two noisy minutes. It's always waiting, ready to welcome us, tucked under the wing of the day. I'll be there. Where will you be? And thank you so much for joining us today. Those of you who are here live, those of you who might who might watch on recording. I wanted to ask if you might put in the Q&A where you are from, where are you joining us from today? And I think we might take just a quick minute to hear from each person. I'm Mehana, I'm here in Kalihiwai on the island of Kauaʻi. Sophie, where are you?
Kia ora, exactly. I'm in Wellington, New Zealand, Aotearoa.
Wonderful, North and South Pacific. How about you, Charlie?
I'm Charlie Schweik from North America, Massachusetts. Ida?
Hita.
I'm an Indian by origin, but I live in the United Kingdom.
Ida, do you want to read down the participant list and invite people to talk?
Yeah. Would you unmute them as we talk? Go.
Yes.
Shriyansha, I think.
Hi, good afternoon. I am from Seattle, Washington, and I'm a student at the University of Washington, Tacoma.
Wonderful.
There's Mairi Gunn.
Welcome, Shriyansha. Mairi.
Kia ora, I'm Mairi from Tāmaki Makaurau from the North Island of Aotearoa. I've just completed my PhD using the Commons as a framework and a desired outcome and commoning as a methodology to overcome intercultural discomfort. It's lovely to see your faces. Hi, Sophie.
Kia ora.
We have Bex. Rebecca. Sorry, I was reading your screen name.
Ida, do you have the ability to...
Hi,
Sorry?
Bex.
Oh, great. Kia ora. Hi, my name is Rebecca and I'm from Wellington. In New Zealand as well. Hey, I'm a medical person and I'm interested in the overlap between climate, environment, communities and human health. Thank you so much.
Mahalo,
Kia ora,
Bex.
Bex.
We've also got Andrea.
Aloha, Andrea.
Aotearoa, New Zealand. I live on Te Waipounamo in the top of the South Island, and I'm doing a PhD with human-plant relationships for environmental anthropology, environmental humanities, but my origin is in Slovenia, and so I am studying as a tangata tiriti, so as an ally of Rā Māori. It's lovely to be here. Nice to see you. Thank you for the lovely poem.
Kia ora. Thank you for joining us today.
Yep, those are the responses I have in here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you all. It's wonderful to be here with you today. Let's see. My screen sharing option disappeared. Oh, there it is. Okay, so I will share my screen and get us started. And at the end, there is time for Q&A, so I hope you might have questions. All right, it's showing full screen now, right? Okay, well, welcome to our presentation today, Kīpuka Kuleana, Restoring Lands to People and People to Lands in the Hawaiian Islands. I'm really happy to be a part of World Commons Week, and especially to represent Oceania. Here's a picture of Oceania. I think we are really one of the largest regions of the world, stretching as we do across this great, great ocean. Hawaii is located right here in the middle. And we are the most isolated landmass on Earth. But of course, as oceanic people, we don't feel isolated at all. We feel connected to all of our cousins in the Asian coast, the North American, South American coast, Australia, Aotearoa, to our many friends there, up to Alaska, by water, because we are voyaging peoples who see water as a form of connection. I also show this picture and start with this picture because the Hawaiian Islands remain colonized by the United States under the rule of the United States, which is one country of the North American continent. And I think this slide shows how by distance and by culture, this may, the challenges of being of an island nation, being governed by a continent so far away, and also ecologically, because we have very different systems of the people have developed to survive in this place. And today I'll talk about some of those systems. I'm going to talk about 4 things, basically the influence of Elinor Ostrom's work and principles on my own life, as well as the IASC, which I'm so grateful to be here celebrating, what commons are like in Hawaii, the impacts of ongoing settler colonialism, and the restoration of the commons. Despite colonialism and the many ways Hawaiian communities are restoring commons across the Hawaiian Islands, opportunities for land returns to community stewardship and common and being held in common, and how this is key for climate change. Then I hope to just end a little bit and discuss with anyone who wants to some implications for the IASC. I so enjoyed our last conference in Nairobi, and I heard a lot of discussion about, how do practitioners of the Global South, how do they belong to the IASC, which is expanding so much? And how do young and established knowledge holders work together? How do we bridge research and practice, Indigenous and allied scholarship? And I hope this talk will be an example of that and maybe offer some implications for your work, as well as the IASC. I just wanted to begin with some of the mentors and influences on my life. This is my grandmother. You will see a lot of lei in my slides because she is a lei maker and taught us that you can know any landscape by the lei which you can make from it, and every lei can only be made from one place. So this is our practice and a way I navigate through the world thanks to her. My parents, Burl and Gary Blake, who are longtime community advocates and participants in building community institutions, who raised me and my sister on farming citrus and bananas here on the Hawaiian island of Kauaʻi, our broader community, which works so hard to take care of this place, as well as my husband and our 3 children. And my home, Kalihiwai. This is the ocean that we visit daily. So I'm very fortunate now to be a professor in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Management at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, as well as in the UHC Grant College program. I'm especially fortunate because my position is 40% community outreach and extension, as well as instruction and research. And so I get to teach both graduate and undergraduate students at the University of Hawaii, and also on the top left, community classes in my home community and across the Hawaiian Islands for working professionals, practitioners, nonprofit leaders, and then increasingly to bring those groups together in classes. All of our courses support community efforts, and that's the top right picture. And I feel so very fortunate to be a part of a community of scholars, such as the IASC. This is a field trip from our Nairobi conference this summer to look at the enclosures of grazing lands of the Maasai, which was an amazing experience. I especially today wanted to thank 2 mentors who've made it possible for me to do my job as a professor and to do the work I do now, and who helped to train me. I was lucky to attend, my background is as a middle school teacher. I taught middle school for many, many years on my home island of Kauaʻi, especially place-based education, Aina-based education. All around us, the lands were changing so quickly, and I felt like I was teaching my students, but without maybe doing the work myself of influencing the lands that they would have available to care for as they grew up, because things were changing and being developed so fast on my island. So I went back to Stanford for a PhD in environmental studies, mentored by Peter Fedusik in the bottom left, who was so instrumental in reaching out to Hawaiian students, as he is from Hawaii himself, as well as in showing how the Hawaiian Islands can be a model system, both ecologically and socially. I was so grateful to go to Berkeley and find Louise Fortman, who brought me into this community. She's there at the top right, both of them with my son, who chanted to start us off today, who's now 15. But Louise really understood what it was to be a community engaged scholar and to do rigorous work with and about community in partnership. And her mentorship was vital. Without her, I would have probably dropped out of graduate school. She introduced me to a group of women scholars that continue to work together at the IASC. And she really built community within our lab and continues to advise and mentor my work. And also to get to find through Louise and others the work of Eleanor Ostrom, because I was told again and again when I arrived at Stanford, how is the work you want to do in your home community relevant, generalizable? Why does it matter? This is such a small place. And Lynn Ostrom's work showed that communities do matter and that community groups have developed innovative solutions that are enduring over time, and also that you can immerse deeply in community after community after community, and their stories can be brought together to tell a larger and more generalizable picture, but first rooted in place. And that was really helpful for me in terms of navigating graduate school while having 3 children. And then this picture on the bottom right, many of the friends and co-scholars that trained together, this is us getting to, after listening to Lynn Ostrom when she came to Stanford after accepting the Nobel Prize. So I want to thank you all for the IASC and Lynn Ostrom's role in it, and the way that so many of you carry on her work and were mentored by and learned from her, and the way that work now expands all over the world and is driven by scholars from places all over the world, and that the IASC is an organization that can make space for that, and that we can all learn together. This is a picture of a panel in Nairobi as well, led by Sybil Diver, who's here, and Mez Baker-Menard. There's Sophie in the middle, and many of our students together. We were sharing work from a special issue of Ecology and Society, which is out now, issue 151, on collaborative management, environmental caretaking, and sustainable livelihoods. And we're here with some of the amazing Ostrom Award winners from India, scholars from Africa and all over the world, Japan. So I just wanted to, we're all very familiar with Ostrom's principles, and I wanted to just bring them up because in this discussion, I'm going to offer you lessons or examples of community management across Hawaii and community cared for commons, and how that might add a few principles to her work, as well as demonstrate some of her existing principles. But I wanted to show that in my teaching, I asked my students to make their own principles. Some of them may be derived from Ostrom's. They can do this in creative format. They can collage, they can write chants, they can make videos or maps. But they create principles to guide not just enduring governance of the commons, but to guide care and governance of resources in their own work and in their own communities. We don't talk about management as much in Hawaii because we are related to all elements of the environment, our aina, that which feeds us, lands and waters. And so these are principles to guide them in their work to care for and make decisions about aina. And so many, are takes on Ostrom's principles, such as the importance of boundaries, and they also add their own, such as things like patience, or the importance of building strong community, or the importance of having a very long-term vision in your work. This one follows the flow of water, mountain to sea, and these were just done last week and shared in our class. This one, each principle, Wailana has created each principle is a part of the canoe. And builds upon the function of the canoe. So for example, the kia or the mast is a strong sense of responsibility that should guide one's work. The palevai, the splash guards, are conflict resolution, that those splash guards on the canoe that keep the water out are an important aspect of this work. And that the boundaries must also extend to maintaining balance in your own life, as well as to boundaries of community and a resource. This is one done in the frame of building a rock wall and the different function of different stones. This is one done with drawings. And this is one that's drawn to show that all of the principles are connected and dependent upon people. So I just wanted to share that as an example of how Dr. Ostrom's work, Auntie Lynn, as many call her, continues to influence myself and my students and to be an extension. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about commons in Hawaii and on my own island of Kauaʻi. So again, here we are in the middle of the Pacific. Here's Hawaii. Zooming in, my island is on the top left the most northwest of the Hawaiian Islands, or the most north, the island of Kauaʻi. And I come from an area where two districts come together, Haleʻa and Ko'olau. And I just wanted to share some pictures, including from my days as a middle school teacher. I continue to do that work in the summer. We run summer programs on the bottom right, connecting students to this place and the lands and waters they call home, teaching them how to eat from them and also have them sustain their lives. This is an aerial view of the area I'm from. You can see that each community stretches from the mountain to the sea, following the flow of water. These are called ahupua'a. In my area, on my island today, there's 75,000 residents, about 10% Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian. And each of these ahupua'a, each of these mountain to sea pie-shaped areas was traditionally self-sufficient because the families of the area could range freely from mountain to sea, getting the logs they needed for canoes, as well as the fish they needed, as well as farming in the Midlands, taro patches. So here on the left, when land was privatized in Hawaii and people had to claim their lands within this larger ahupua'a, this happened in 1850, you can see, for example, that this small purple down by the sea also has a purple up along the river. And so the house site would be down by the ocean, behind the dunes, as the dunes is where burials are. And then the taro patch and the farming agricultural plot would be up in the uplands. And that's about maybe an hour's paddle up the river. And that would be the daily journey, day to day. Wake up early in the morning, go out on the reef over on this side, harvest your fish, harvest your octopus, and then later in the day, paddle up the river, harvest your taro, cook that, pound it into your meal for the evening. But everything was obtained from within this ahupua'a. People didn't have to leave and go further away. Just to show you briefly what's happening with land ownership in Hawaii. So this is that same watershed. This is the number of parcels in 1850 and really up through the 1940s. And then the larger areas around are being subdivided. Those were a ranch, first missionary lands, then ranch lands. Now those are being subdivided and sold. So the light blue is the remaining ranch. And you can see all these new parcels that are being created. So the enclosure of commons, the introduction of private property, all of the pinks are lands that are owned by people outside of Hawaii. And you can see those concentrate on the coast because people want to be on the coast of Hawaii, making it harder and harder for local families to live. This is some of the places, the most frequent places of addresses of landowners in Hawaii. And this is what happened during COVID. Our median house price doubled, increased 57% in 1 year from 2020 to 2021. 1 in 8 houses are vacation rentals sitting vacant. So it's getting harder and harder for the local families to live in this area. So I've dedicated my life and work to both listening to and understanding the stories and relationships to place of the longtime families of the area, and then also to helping them keep their lands and to trying to buy lands that can be community spaces, restored spaces that the community can come back to take care of. This is a book based on this work and interviews with over 70 elders who say this place can feed you and take care of you if you know how to take care of it. They express that this place has all of the food we need as long as we care for it, and this reciprocal relationship with place. And they also very specific relationships with place. This is the coast of one ahupua'a, but elders will say, oh, we only harvest from this reef. This is my family's area. We didn't go to the other reef. That was for this family. And if we went outside of our ahupua'a, people would say, why are you here? Are you not taking care of your own ice spots? So this idea of very specific gathering places cared for by practices such as observing moon phases, observing spawning periods, really limited harvests because you were just getting your food for the day. Things like tickling an octopus by hand or with a stick rather than spearing it. Reserving a reef, the most shallow, safest reef for elders to gather. And these practices were all cared for at the local level. There were local level laws, and anyone who was going to fish in this area. You had to be from the area in order to fish to a mile out or the edge of the coral reef, until Hawaii became a territory of the US, at which point these fisheries were condemned. Not all of them, though. There still are debate about whether there are some remaining community fisheries with legal rights to regulate their nearshore fishing areas. Regardless, there have been laws that have allowed community-based subsistence fishing areas, and these are opportunities for communities in Hawaii to create state law based on local tradition and practices to manage their fisheries. The first community to do this is Ha'ena on Kauaʻi, the green dot, which is where I did my dissertation work. Since then, there are 4 other Hawaii communities and all these groups in red that are wanting to do the same thing. And this is really based on the idea of kuleana. Kuleana is rights and responsibilities, but when I asked this particular elder, taro farmer and fisherman, Anakala Eri Ka'anana, he said kuleana is the lands within your family's care. It is that which is yours to take care of, because that's how we know who you are and what you're capable of. Is it abundant? Is it feeding the community? Is it well kept? That helps us know who you are and what rights and further responsibilities we can entrust you with. So this is the idea of authority and obligation that are based in interdependence and community, and of rights and responsibilities in balance. We also have the idea of Kīpuka, and Kīpuka is a lava flow. When a lava flow covers an area, the Kīpuka is the remaining trees and forests that are left standing. It also can be a depression in a reef, a sheltered area, and from these Kīpuka, they're areas of abundance that reseed the rest of the area. So even though the rest of the area is lava rock, the seeds from these trees will help to regenerate forest across the landscape. So Kīpuka Kuleana is the title of this talk. It's also the title of our nonprofit working on Kauaʻi to buy back and restore community care of lands on our island. So I'm going to get into part 3 of our talk and part 4. So this work on Kauaʻi and the work of the community fishery is just one example of community groups all across the Hawaiian Islands that are largely indigenous led, that are caring for lands and waters over all sorts of ownership types, whether they're state lands, federal lands, private lands, that are reinstating community commons and care. So this is a project to map those community groups. We began this project in 2022 in order to really bring visibility to community groups across Hawaii caring for lands and waters, and to spark discussions about what they need. How is this movement going? What are commonalities, common challenges, sources of support? So we were able to do this through 2 graduate student courses. As I mentioned, all of my student classes, students are volunteering with community groups, partnering in small groups with specific community groups to understand their story, help them out, provide volunteers when they have large groups of youth, help with restoration work, create maps, do research, whatever is needed. Often they create story maps and websites. We are gradually collecting stories of these community groups and their origins. And then we also worked on this project to gather information across Hawaii. So it was all based on publicly available data, web searches, and also student knowledge, network lists, person-to-person sharing about groups, as well as structured in-depth interviews with 32 individuals from 12 different community organizations. And we continue to build that work. So I just wanted to say one finding was that many of these groups came out of the Hawaiian activism movement of the 70s, and movements to block military actions, to occupy lands, to block developments, often where these kinds of occupations had happened in the 70s and 80s. These community groups had then sprung up to take care of these places once the developments were stopped. I just wanted to give you an example of the diversity of groups. So I'll just share about a couple of different organizations here. This is the Waipa Foundation. This is on my home island, and this was actually the first place I worked as an educator. It's a 1,600-acre valley, an intact ahupua'a, owned by Kamehameha Schools. So it's private land of an educational trust that many of the Hawaiian monarchs turned over their land in trust for future to care for the Hawaiian community. So this is an example of that land base. It was supposed to be developed by a Japanese firm into a resort in the 80s, but the community fought that and said no, and were able to instead obtain a long-term lease to the valley. They've restored the agricultural systems. One of the first things they did every Thursday, this is taro, our ancestral crop. Every Thursday, volunteers gather to make poi, our ancestral food, which is shared throughout the island and given free to elders. And so this is a mountain to sea restoration effort, which includes education. There's also a farmer's market, community kitchen. This is Malama Makua. In 2029, the US military leases of lands in Hawaii, which are extensive and large and include ongoing bombing, live fire training, those will all expire in 2029. So many organizations and communities are working for the restoration of these lands. Of course, they have environmental hazards. Many of them have live ordnance, such as the entire island of Kaho'olawe. This is Makua Valley, and Malama Makua is an organization that works for the demilitarization of Makua Valley, and they hold cultural accesses and ceremonies monthly and on the equinoxes and solstices to go back and visit cultural sites in the valley and remember our connections to this place and teach about them. Many of the projects in Hawaii are elder-led. They were founded by elders. This is an example. This is Uncle Henry Chang Wo, who grew up in Ewa Beach, which was once plentiful with seaweed, limu, which you can see on the beach there. He reminds us that seaweed is the foundation of a marine food chain and our ecosystem, and that it relies on fresh water. So Ewa is just next to Pearl Harbor, which is of course one of the most polluted estuaries in the world and militarized, much stream diversion. And so the seaweeds have nearly disappeared, but Uncle Henry started an effort to replant seaweed, which now has spread across Hawaii and includes a nursery that grows seaweed and spreads it out to these seaweed restoration projects across the Hawaiian Islands. Just two more brief examples, and then we'll launch into some findings. This is a family with missionary roots that owns family lands on the island of Oahu in the middle of an urban area. You can see this green spot and green roof is their home. And they have had a son who loved to garden and was really enthralled by native Hawaiian plants, especially those for agroforestry and food production. He passed away in a helicopter crash, and his parents continued his work of restoration and farming and opened his gardens to the community. This happened especially during COVID, right at the cusp of COVID, so they became a community feeding site for their whole neighborhood. And they continue to have regular work days for school groups and community members that come and learn to farm and learn to eat from this place. And just the last example to continue on how these places can be in urban areas. This is the largest fish pond in Hawaii, which was filled in to make docks and marinas and a private sort of boating community. And this is an organization that started when one individual simply put up a sign and said, "What makes Hawaii Kai livable?" and invited people to get together at neighborhood restaurants and start to talk about it. And people talked about the importance of enforcing the community plan and the community development plans, which many hadn't known about. And they started to identify important places, including Hawaiian temple sites, agriculture sites, and they started to figure out stewardship agreements to take care of them. So there's a mosaic of community cared for and cultural sites within this very urban environment. And I wanted to show you how these sites are growing, how this movement is growing from just a few organizations up through 1990, the red dots, through many more each decade, growing and growing to 224 groups, caring for 290 sites across the Hawaiian Islands. So I want to, call back to Ostrom's work with different cases and building knowledge across cases. This is a growing movement in Hawaii with about 85 groups born from 2000 to 2010, another 90, 2010 to 2020, and 11 since 2020 alone. And again, this is internet-based work. So this is just the publicly available groups. This is a word cloud based on their mission and vision. You can see the importance of the words community, Hawaiian, and cultural. And on the right, we show what activities these groups do, with the largest being education, followed by ecosystem restoration. Activities such as health are also important, sovereignty work, social justice work, food production, and cultural preservation. Groups care for a range of sites, both fish ponds and taro patches and temples on the left, but also farms and gardens, marine and coastal areas, and then areas that are a combination, such as mountain to sea. Some key challenges they face are the surrounding environmental conditions, being on contaminated land, being surrounded by urban environments, disrupted water flow, challenges of surrounding differences in values, operating within a largely tourist economy, commercial economy, financial challenges of long-term financial support, not for just a new program or living grant to grant, but especially to provide well-paid, sustaining jobs where people can really work in this sector. And not in tourism and some of these other areas. Over half of the executive directors of these organizations are completely unpaid, working as volunteers. And then just capacity, balancing, school groups and programs with the opportunity to really root and grow their organization and their own staff and efforts. These are some of the many networks. Ostrom told us the importance of networks, both vertical and horizontal. Many of these are networks that support these groups and that bring these groups together, groups that do agroforestry, groups that do fisheries, groups that do seaweed, groups that are on certain landowners' lands, groups that do education. There's all these wonderful networks, yet more than half of these hui are not in any formal networks. But we learned that there's also a lot of power in informal networks, which is shared. This is an example of a workday where many different groups are coming together to support one another in big ventures like reopening taro patches, or we just had a fish pond restoration on our island that involved 1,000 people working to rebuild the wall. When there are things like public hearings where these fisheries rules need to be passed into law by government, all of these communities show up for one another, bring their networks, bring their community supporters, so that you have a cross Hawaii-wide strong movement. And now these networks are increasingly global. Hawaii hosted the IUCN, and many of these community groups were part of that hosting and that sharing and the broadening of efforts to connect across the world. Community monitoring and enforcement. Ostrom, much of her work emphasizes that monitoring might be the most important aspect. And so many community monitoring programs to look at how our resources are changing over time with climate across seasons of the year, and to do monitoring and enforcement sort of work against harvest and illegal harvest, which 90% of that also is education and building your community that's connected to the resource. One thing that all of the organizations I work with and talk to say is that ceremony is really important. That's an important principle for them, is that the aina itself, the land and the waters, guide the work, and we connect to them and call upon them through ceremony. And this is an example of our annual makahiki ceremony being reinvigorated in our community, which just happened 2 weeks ago. Another key principle for the organizations in Hawaii is the importance of teaching across generations, that this is generational work, that we need to be growing future leaders, and that we need to always be teaching within the work and handing the work on across generations. In that most recent work with community groups and the 32 people we interviewed, they talked about education as a kind of networking, and they talked about older and younger siblings, where one group, employees of that group, might go out and start many more in their home areas, and that the groups are mentoring one another in that way, just like a bundle of lauhala or weaving, unfurling. And also that those younger groups contribute back labor, but also contribute inspiration and learning, and also the importance always of working with schools and educators. Just two more principles as I come to an end here. One is this idea of cultural kīpuka, that, and remember my landscape lava flow image, that even small areas of community caretaking, even small spaces can create an opportunities for communities to return to Aina and to be the caretakers. And I love this quote. And this is from a family that's saying, even if you've lost your land in a community where you are ancestrally from, and you cannot go back to that home, still go back to the beach, still go back to the area. I tell my cousins, keep going, never mind driving another 20 minutes, bring your families. This is where they should learn to swim, catch their first fish, and play volleyball, because it's a connection for you. But you have to do that for them, because then they will have a sense of connection and responsibility, even if they live someplace else. And so this is why we work on helping families who have lands to keep them, but also on buying lands that families can then return to. Because a small taro patch where people can come and camp and work monthly can make a big difference in keeping a community connected to place. This is the final principle, and that's what I shared earlier, kuleana, the balance of rights and responsibilities, and it being based on caretaking. What if rights in resource management decisions were allocated based on responsibility? What if instead of anyone who comes to a public hearing has an equal say, there was some way to weight the say and the input of people who'd interacted with the place for a longer time, who are actively engaged in its caretaking. One of the problems for Hawaii and being a part of the United States of America is the amazing democratic principles of the United States, which do value public participation. However, they mean that any member of the public has an equal right of access and of decision-making in many ways as a community member or a longtime descendant and caretaker. And so trying to create ways where there's community responsibility that is neither entirely private or entirely public and open to everyone, but where there are groups that are caretaking that whose rights and responsibilities are acknowledged in a different way. So this work, of course, and these groups are a case of community-based resource management, restoration of the commons, resilience in the face of shifting climate. Many of these ecosystems communities care for provide both carbon sinks, flood resilience, food resilience in times like COVID. It's a case of ecosystem services, social networks and relationships, resurgence of indigenous knowledge and governance and science, working alongside Western science and contemporary management, community needs-driven research, applied research, but also land back and rematriation. And so that's what I'd like to close with, mobilizing land return and collective care in the face of climate change, and then open it up for questions. This is our organization I spoke of. All of the proceeds from my book go to support Kīpuka Kuleana, which is perpetuating kuleana to place through protection of family lands and cultural landscapes on Kauaʻi. We're a nonprofit. We welcome donations from anyone and anywhere. And I bring this up because as part of the Association for the Study of Commons, to have an academic who started a nonprofit and who does advocacy work, that's all a part of the kinds of things we all do. But it might not be typical in other academic organizations. We do basically four things. We do research into Hawaiian archives, language, resources, maps, elder interviews about places and about Aina, and use them to educate both new landowners, community groups, school groups. We run programs where we take school groups out to visit places and to learn to be stewards of places. So this is one of our summer programs, stripping albizia. Albizia is a introduction from other parts of the world. These trees get huge. They can collapse on a stream, block it up, create very dangerous flood conditions and damming. But 10-year-olds can strip an albizia when it's this size, a sapling, and kill it using just a small knife. So that's one of the stewardship techniques we're learning, as well as reef stewardship, replanting of seaweeds, all of those things. We also help families. We provide workshops that bring families together to learn to start family trusts, to work with lawyers, to work with the county, to do property tax agreements, do conflict resolution. And we also work on policies that protect ancestral lands in Hawaii. This is our January workshop for Kauaʻi Island families. We'll have another one this January. We also trained 50 different individuals in genealogy research this year, which helps them to claim and protect ancestral lands. And then our education programs, as I said, are really important. This is our summer program, teaching kids how to harvest food from their home area while they care for that place. And then it culminates with a cooking competition where they cook lunch for their families and design meals, which are shown here. We encourage participation across generations. This is a mother and son, Avelina and Haveo, that are part of our program. And it's just another example of how when one family keeps their land and allows other families to come and camp and learn, it provides benefit for the whole community. So even though it might be continued private ownership, or it could be community held ownership, land trust held ownership, lease agreements on state or federal lands, what's common is the caretaking, the responsibility, and that it's community driven, in sense, a commons. So we have a lands fund that is working also, as I said, to buy lands back. And I just wanted to show there's great potential for the return of lands to Hawaiian communities and to communities in Hawaii. This is just a map of 2 other islands, Hawaii and Oahu. Yellow is state lands, orange is federal lands. I mentioned the military leases are up in 2029. The blue on the left and sort of bluish green on the right, that's Kamehameha Schools, largest landowners. So those are all lands that are available. And then this is a time where lots of large missionary families and their land holdings, like the Parker Ranch or the Campbell Estate, where those are starting to break up and be sold. So it's a very, very important time for land back in Hawaii. And that's a broader issue, of course, all across the world. We work in this area of reparations and rematriation of land, or restoring the relationships of people and land. This is some of the examples of land returns to tribes in the North American continent. And this wonderful sister land trust we have in Oakland of the Ohlone people, where they are buying back small urban areas across Oakland for gardens and for himetka, which are spaces of resilience where they store water and food, and also learn to cultivate seed and conduct ceremony, but where they're able to really provide for their people in case of disaster, climate disasters, earthquakes, etc., and also to have an educational and healing space in this urban area. We've seen that community groups are key to response to climate change induced disasters. Our community broke the US rainfall record in 2018. There were 12 landslides across our highway. And so each community group was isolated once again, as they were traditionally. This is the bay I started out, the bay I'm from, what it looked like the day after the floods. And so each watershed had to provide their own food again and start community feeding centers, go door to door, check on community members. When the Red Cross came, people said, we're fine, we're fine. And they often didn't arrive for weeks anyway, but community members within a week had a Google document, a Google database of over 500 impacted families, what medicines they needed, their children's shoe size to get them boots, and was going door to door, delivering health and all of the care that was needed by community members, driven by community groups. Which is part of a network working with community groups, indigenous community groups on the forefront of climate change across the Pacific and the US. And that's where I wanted to end. Just thinking about how land returns are important to the work you do and care about, how IASC might help to facilitate that work, and how this work might be an example for the future of IASC and the ongoing work to build Indigenous and allied work, scholarly and applied work, global and global North and South, and just all of us together. So we do the work we do. There's so much for your time and your listening, and mahalo. I think we have 10 minutes for questions and discussion.
Fantastic, Mehana. Aloha. Incredible to see this so condensed, really, and having known a tiny bit about your work before, to actually feel like a whole lot of new layers are being unpacked here. Please, everyone, write some your questions in the chat, and I will facilitate. I just wanted to, but I wanted to kick things off if I can, unless Charlie or Hito or others have got burning questions. But I wanted just touch on this idea of Kuleana, because it seems so important to what that you want to tie obligations and responsibilities, or rights and responsibilities to each other. How's that work? How's that going to work with the vacant land ownership, with the properties that are sitting vacant? How does that work in the current kind of American system of property ownership?
Well, sometimes it doesn't work. And you may know we had those devastating fires in August. And that was an example of, lands in an area that was very verdant, that was very wet. And then the water was diverted for sugarcane plantations. And then when the sugar plantations, couldn't compete on the global market, that land became sort of banked for tourists. The area became tourist. Lahaina was very tourism driven, right? And the lands around Lahaina were sort of held with the potential of being developed for tourist accommodation, second homes. But as they were being held, they weren't being cared for. People, the landowners weren't taking responsibility to manage invasive species, to make that land productive. And so it was just growing invasive grasses. And then when you had this, really strong storm, really strong winds and downed power lines and invasive grass, it became the most devastating fire in US history. So I think the responsibility often isn't there with land ownership. It's a matter of, what's the best way? How can this land just be held and spend as little as possible to profit as much as possible? And it's often resold with the development entitlements sort of speculated on. So I think two things. One is the ability to downzone lands if they are not being cared for, to have permit sunset, because now they're in Hawaii kind of, they're just perpetual often. And then to figure out what opportunities there are for groups that do want to take responsibility for those lands. Can groups have agreements with those landowners? Can they come and do farming and restoration there? And that's happening increasingly, because it's also hard to care for land as one individual, right? Buying land is a great responsibility, and it can be a great liability as well. So ways to connect landowners to surrounding community that can help them to fulfill responsibility.
That's fantastic, fantastic. Okay, we have a question from Hita.
Great.
Thanks, Mehana. I mean, when I was listening to the talk, I mean, something that struck me is the fact that we are actually taking particular worldviews and communicating it to kind of other worldviews. And a lot of this is something that's ongoing across various academic disciplines. If you think of Black feminism, for example, or other particular schools of thought, when we try to communicate across these particular worldviews into more hegemonic discourses, I was just curious about the trade-offs there. What are we losing? What kind of detail are we losing when we do these things? And what is being gained? I mean, yes, there is this thing of having conversation across worldviews, but also other ways in which these different worldviews can come into dialogue with each other. And also, how does one strike a balance then between the loss of what is essentially contextual peculiarity and detail versus, the more mainstreaming of certain ideas? I don't know. It's just it's probably not particularly well worded, but I think
it's a great question. It's a great question. Hita, I'm going to bounce back to say one more thing about Sophie's, and then I'll answer yours. Just one other thing, Sophie, I think it's very true across Oceania that land has very complex title, and that colonial title often is very problematic. So I think there's also a responsibility as a landowner in these settings to think about, maybe ways to return the land when you're done with it. And our organization is getting that now as people say, I have no descendants and I've lived here for a very long time. I love this place. I'm worried there's no housing for residents. I'd like to turn it back to a community housing trust or something. And then ways government can support that, right? And find, do you need something to care for you in your old age? How can we make that possible? Yet you're not going to sell it for market value, yet you're, so those sorts of things. Hita, your question is vital, and I struggle with a lot as someone who does very, place-specific research in my own community, and as I branch out to support other communities. And then as we think about implications, you know, to connect beyond Hawaii. I think, you know, the key is, I think, to have it really rooted in the culture and community in an authentic way. For me, one of those ways is working with students who come from communities across Hawaii and across the world, because they have relationships and they have kuleana. So if I can support them in those, you know, that's really vital, and it helps them in the life's work they have to do. At the same time, it is important to translate more broadly, but I don't think that's possible unless it's authentically rooted. And then what is lost in the translation, I think, I don't think it has to be. I mean, I think partly it's a balance of time, right? You don't always have time to tell the authentic story of 40 places in one short time, and you've seen that today. But I think if you can just share really deeply of a few, and Louise always told us, what is this a case of? How would you know if you fell over it in the dark? What is this? But if you establish what it is in a really rooted way, then I think that may allow for the broader, for the understanding first and the connection, and then the application beyond. And then I think too, another thing is to create spaces for both, to create times that are meant to be for broader audiences. And I'll give you an example, the reinvigoration of our makahiki ceremony, right? The Maori, you know, I met Maori friends who conduct makahiki for the whole city of Dunedin, right? So it's a family, and everyone in Dunedin can participate. And there's a massive screen in the center of the city, and everyone submits names of people who've passed that past year, and everyone's ancestors go up as part of the Maori makahiki ceremony. And that's amazing. And at the same time, I think that, you know, for our community, we also need a time where it's maybe just our families and where it's quieter, and we're not sharing the ceremony with, you know, tourists who are passing by and are going to have an educational experience. We can do both, but we need both, if that makes sense.
Beautiful, amazing. I love these translations between Maori, Te Reo Maori in New Zealand and Native Hawaiian. We call it matariki, but it's the same. Matahiki, matariki, very close. And aina is of course the same as kainga in New Zealand. Hui is a word I just noticed you using. You mean as a group, with hui here is more of an active verb to hui, but does it also mean to come together as well as to be the group?
Yes, it's both. It's both a verb and a noun. Yes.
Amazing. And Mairi is put into the chat. How would you translate commons into Hawaiian? Is aina? I mean, it's obviously a word you use a lot relating to homelands, but is it a commons? Is a word for commons?
That's a great question. You know, sometimes I think about kaya ulu, and that's why I chose it as the title of my book. It's community. And for us, community is not apart from land. Land is both the fundamental element in shaping community, but it's also part of the community itself. Your winds are part of your community, your mountains, your rivers. And then your elders that go back into the land and become the land, right? So it's cyclical, it's unbroken. We've been saying aina ho'i a lot here, which is land returning. It's people returning to land, returning to people. And that was part of where my title came from. But so that's, you know, aina ho'i. That might be a translation as well. And Hita, I was thinking, you know, that makahiki ceremony, matari'i, it can only be done for the city of Dunedin because families have done it themselves for a long time and prepared their children so their children can conduct it on that level. And I was thinking about trees in a forest and how they have roots and how those roots connect. And so I think that's part of it too, right? The deep roots, those roots actually are exchanging nutrients, and that can happen all over the world as it does in IASC. And it might not be completely seen, but it is a constant relationship building.
Fantastic. Teresa, do you want to ask your question live? Or should I read it out? You're mute. The question she wrote.
I've opened it up. If Teresa
Thank
wants
you.
to talk.
Anyone wants to talk, they can perhaps put their video camera on. Teresa's question in the chat, at least, was how significant was the role of Indigenous Hawaiian religion in your work?
Maybe more than I knew, Teresa, because traditional Hawaiian religion was very oppressed. I mean, my grandmother, for example, you know, in her school, when kids were beaten if they spoke Hawaiian in school. And in her school, if you stood up and danced hula, you would be kicked out because it was seen as too sexual and too, and you know, and all of these things were kind of related to ties to religion and westernizing us and Christianizing us. So in many ways, Hawaiian religion went underground, and you know, even the elders I interviewed, they wouldn't want to talk about Hawaiian religion, if that makes sense. But what never went away was the values underlying it, right? The fact that it was rooted in land, and that all of our gods are manifested in our elements, our natural elements, right? We have a god of the heavens, and we have gods of the ocean, and of every form of the ocean, right? And so when you're taking care of those things, and the you know, whenua, honua is our Mother Earth, papahana moku, and that our religion is to care for these things. So that was always passed on, the responsibility to care for these things, but not necessarily that those things were deities. Whereas that now, but with the reclamation of things like hula, dance, and chant, and our language, the names of the deities are in there, and those relationships are in there. So now we're able to reclaim those parts as well. So I think the Hawaiian religion guided us, even if we didn't know it, if that makes sense. And it's guided our families, even if without them saying so or acknowledging it or being able to.
Yes, exactly. Amazing. I also noticed your question, your commentary about looking after the elderly. There was quite a lot of commentary about if you are with the reefs that are reserved for the elderly, something around if you're making the most amount of protecting the most vulnerable, then you are somehow succeeding. Is that part of the culture?
Absolutely. And you know, so part of it is, if you are a fisherman, you always first fish for the person who taught you, fisherman or woman who taught you. But also part of it is our elders want to fish as long as they can and feed themselves. And I think that might be true all over Oceania. So that was a kind of kapu, that was a kind of closed area where the easiest gathering was just for elders, so they can still go and gather. And that's not legal in the US system. So many of our communities tried to reestablish that law, and we're told, well, no, you can't make a law that's just for elders. That's exclusionary, that's discriminatory under US thinking, right? And so that's, you know, that's a challenge, that thing about law being, you know, for everyone or for no one. An area is closed to everyone, or no one can, or open to all, right? And it's the same thing with, you know, we can't regulate the number of visitors that come to Hawaii any year. We can't regulate who buys land in Hawaii. And that's part of the way US law is framed. And it's part of the reason that, you know, remaining under the US will be an ecological and cultural challenge as we reclaim these things. But I think that, you know, sometimes it's your elders who are the most vulnerable, other times it's other groups, but really, really always needing to attend to that. And that being the role of a farmer or a fisherman is that you make sure you're sharing with those who are most in need. And that's something that people talked about in my interviews again and again is, you know, if so-and-so just lost their job or we've had a recession, when I give my fish, I know I'm always going to go to those houses. But at the same time, you know, those people might have babysat my children when they were young. So it's not a welfare, a service. It's just me giving back something they gave, and we will all keep giving to each other and covering each other, and everyone will have abundance.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mehana. We're going to ask if there's any more questions out there. last call. Charlie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll say something in a minute, but I think Hida, do you want to go next? I'll share screen, okay? As we close.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mehana, for this talk. I guess we were saying this earlier today that, you know, while Zoom is something that induces fatigue in all of us, having these sort of sessions which are inclusive, which sort of build relationships that break barriers and that are posed by geography or economy or privilege are ever so important, you know, when we have to create a collective of sorts. So yeah, thank you so much for giving us this wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. And on behalf of the IASC and the World Commons Week organizing team, I thank all of you for attending this particular webinar. We also hope that you will consider attending upcoming IASC events that we have coming into 2024 and the other lectures of this particular series. As you can see, there are some really exciting things. So the European region's keynote webinar has been completed today and is also already on our YouTube channel and will be up on the website shortly. Charlie, yeah, so for the Asia, yeah, we've got a bunch of other events, a conference in Asia, the Early Career Networks panel discussion, which also got completed today and was fantastic. I totally encourage you to take a look at that as well. We've got Mehana, who we just heard from today. We've got talks on the 6th next from Africa. A special webinar panel from the Ostrom workshop also on the 6th. And on the 7th, we have a keynote from China. And on the 8th, we have one from North America, all talking to various issues of justice and so on and so forth. And then also, I think on the 8th, we have Professor Leticia Merino from the Latin American region. So yes, we've got a fantastic lineup of talks. So do consider attending the rest of the talks as well. Charlie, do you want to take over?
Yeah, and I'll just close. And Mehana said that she would like to close with a poem, so we're going to close with that. But before that happens, let me just give you a little projection again. As Ida said, we really hope people will attend the other events if you can, and they'll be recorded if you can't for this week. But in the future, got a couple things going on. One of the things is maybe some people understand is we're trying this year to explore what we call practitioner events online. And so we did a really wonderful one last month with Sociocracy, which was a governance system that's used in intentional communities and worker cooperatives, for example. This one is coming up in December. This is for North America and Latin America. And you've been able to read it, so I'm going to go on. Well, I'll just say it's fascinating. You know, we talked about Ostrom design principles. If you don't know David Sloan Wilson and his colleagues, they've found design principles in evolutionary biology. It's quite remarkable. So anyway, they'll be talking about this pro-social world. We have another event happening on December 13th. I'm sorry, that date is wrong. I'm sorry, it's in January. And that's for Africa and Europe. We probably will have one for Asia as well, but we haven't planned that yet. We have, moving into 2024, we have the 5th IASC workshop at Arizona State University. This is in person. And we have in May, an online early career network workshop, which is online on the study of the commons, and abstracts for that are due soon. So there's the email address. In June, piggybacked with the Ostrom workshop on the workshop in Indiana University, we're doing a 2-day event looking at the connections between the state and governing the commons. So state commons relationships. And then this is the first time, I forgot to announce this morning, So the IASC biannual conference, the next one is actually going to be at my university, at University of Massachusetts. And it fits Mehana's theme in the beginning where you were talking about restoration. The theme is regenerating the commons. And so I hope some of you will come during that time. And I can't help but say, UMass has got a new Center for Braiding Indigenous Knowledges and Science. It's the largest NSF, US NSF grant given to the social sciences ever, as I understand it, and it's international. So we're going to have a track that's around Indigenous science and knowledge sharing in this event. So I hope some of you who are interested in that will participate. With that, let me put this up. And Mehana, you're just a perfect example of why I know we all love IASC. Having these kinds of dialogues, bringing these kinds of insights is just what this is all about. We're so fortunate to have you give this talk. Sophie, thank you to you and Andreas for putting this together. Hida, for everything you've been doing, managing this event. And Michael Cox, who isn't here anymore, but he's been actually running our website. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for the attendees, and we'll hear a poem as we break, okay?
I just wanted to say mahalo again. The IASC really has given me a home as a scholar that sometimes felt hard to find, to see where to fit and where your work could be relevant. And it's been such a great network of colleagues and friends. I'm so grateful. And Hita, for your great, wonderful questions and work. And Charlie, I plan to be there in 2025 for sure. And Sophie, I included art in this presentation because of you, and we'll end with poetry because of you. So this is the same poet we began with. This is Naomi Shihab Nye. She's Palestinian. And I do send aloha to all those for whom that area is a homeland, Palestinian, Israeli. And we're thinking of everyone at this time. This is called Messages from Everywhere. Messages from everywhere light up our backyard. A bird that flew 5,000 miles is trilling 6 bright notes. This bird flew over mountains and valleys and tiny dolls and pencils of children I will never see. Because this bird is singing to me, I belong to the wide world, the people far away who share the air and the clouds. Together we are looking up into all we do not own, and we are listening. Mahalo.
Wow.
Thank you. And attendees, thank you for being here. We hope we see you again sometime later this week. Thanks for this event.
Thanks,
Hello.
Charlie. Thanks, Hita. Aloha, Mehana.
It's always hard with Zoom. You don't hear the clapping, but it was there. It was there.
Mahalo. Have a
I'm going to
beautiful day.
stop recording.